from the Institute of Philosophy and Sociology, Latvia University. And he also, thanks to him, all these technological problems have been solved. And Edmund is one of the main organizers of our conference, and he will also be the first speaker with a presentation, Voices of Generations, the transfer of memories in the Baltic States. With Edmunds.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for introducing me, and I will my presentation. I found it happens to be rather dense, and it's plenty of source resources. So I composed a sheet I would like to share with you. Where it is, I will look for share screen. No, it is shared, I guess. Okay, do you?
Yes.
Do you see this? The title of the paper at first, of course, and of course, I'm also very happy that we gathered in, at least in such format, and COVID, this crisis, maybe urges us to discuss how the pandemic affects this also migration. Does the memory of COVID could last something like stigma in our biographies, and what imprint it left on generations to come? These also questions are discussed globally too. But here in our oral history projects, we study life stories to look for personal narratives, to seek individual experiences. But since no one is isolated, and in fact it is commonly accepted that there is no private language, so memories too are hardly exclusively private. In social sciences, following Hallmarks, we use a notion of collective memory, which stands behind, or say from which point concrete people remembers events and compose a story by use of social frameworks of memory, different cultural repertoires, publicly accepted life scripts, and so on and so forth. There are manifold conceptions to describe that a real author of a story is dissolved in culture, in multiple social relations. Of course, still individual character is unique, since everyone stands in exceptional junction, intersection of groups, of power lines, frames of interpretations, in cognitive systems, and again, so on and so forth. In our studies generally, and in this project particularly, we are interested to explore what kind of memories each generation is carrying, what narratives it constructs and spread into families and passes to society in general to take part in communicative and eventually cultural memory. So it is important to look for master narratives and dominant stories, as well to seek for marginal ones, to collect these subordinal stories in public discourses. The question thus is less about maybe familiar stories, personal experiences. Of course, they come in interviews by default, but I would say it's a question about how to identify exactly generational narratives. So what is generation? How we conceive them? Is there, or what of kind of kind of distinctions are between them? This is in my initial part of my paper. Another is about I would say international comparison of generation. For instance, personally, I do not come across any comparative studies between neighboring countries, between Baltic states, between Russia and other post-Soviet countries, between generations in Eastern Europe countries at large. Mm, mm. Uh, of course, there are studies on parallels or contrasts among different memory regimes, politics of history, legislation concerning remembrance, about commissions of historical truths in different countries and like that. Uh, in my paper, I would like to designate more some points and directions to look in order to compare generations as communities of memory, as Pierre Nora would say, realms of memory, and basically at first in Baltic states. Mm, uh, as I used to remind, generation is twofold term. In its meaning as genealogy in reference to families, the idea of generation is age-old and it is commonly used on daily basis. Storytelling, intergenerational narratives are a common feature of everyday family conversation in which developing individuals learn personal and cultural narratives and exploring possible identities and roles. Another meaning is to comprehend it as generational identity, uh, where collectives these experiences occurring during formative years and lead to communities of remembering and experiences. Mm. For me, much fascinating is that generation which refer to an age cohort with a society that experiences the same set of historical condition over the life course and is recognized by writers, scholars, and fellow public as cultural identity is historical relevance. For example, like baby boomers born in the Western world after the Second World War and like this. Here and bicycle generation narratives embed sequence of defining events as symbolic boundaries. In early 20th century, the sociologist Mannheim defined generations um, as a common location in the historical dimension of the social process. Mm, uh, you can see on the screen the, the, some main basic definitions uh, which I use in my understanding of generations too. Mm, mm. Yes, and generation is formed by a full set of social factors. There are plenty studies about these factors, and they encompass the following. You can see. Mm, mm, uh, It leads to the most general version of a theory of generation formation that being born and then growing up at around the same historical time means experiencing the same historical events and circumstances at similar age, which in turn leads to similar living conditions, behaviors, attitudes, worldviews, and generational consciousness. Um, mm. What is more important, of course, we must add a memory dimension here. As one of Lithuanian colleague said in one review, Baltic states can be viewed not only as geographical, but also as a mnemonic region. Uh, and generational memory, especially towards experiences to Soviet regime, is informed by patterns of post-communist cultures of remembrance in Eastern Europe. Mm. German historian, mm, German historian uh, Stefan mm, Probst, in that respect, identifies four clusters of countries encompassing societies with a strong, weak, or ambivalent anti-communist consensus. If we compare, for instance, Baltic states and Russia, there are huge differences in the discussions how to perceive, how to assess the legacy of Soviet regime upon people. Baltic and other states were, of course, incorporated into communist modernization project. As somewhere, Laima Žilinskiene, she also is on in our program. She put it, and I agree, we can expect that coincidence of generational patterns across the Soviet space, since there were similar factors and trends which affected people under Soviet rule. Mm, um, Taken globally in the Western traditions, there are well-known and commonly recognizable generations. Generations are related to wars, to certain political regimes, and afterward reconstructions like Great Generation, Boomers, Xers, and so on. In Europe, there is no such consolidated model. For instance, there are many discussions and studies on generations in Germany concerning generational standpoints towards the legacy of Nazi regime and the splitting of the state. In Spain, generations are associated with their civil war and Franco regime. But in territories to east from this former Iron Curtain, I found just few studies I put in on the sheet. Uh, just few studies about generations and and, and memory culture in these countries. You can see there's about Balkan, about Poland, and of course Lithuania, and also in Estonia there are such studies. Mm, And to briefly compare, I will give just some snapshots on studies of generations as cultural entities, as a frame of reference and milieus, the memoir. Uh, uh, in Baltics, who share a piece of recent history, partly with Eastern Europe countries and particularly with Russia, we may distinguish about 5 to 6 generations in these quite dense and harsh 20th century. Mm, Now you can see Russians have a quite solid generational model, and it is interesting for us to conceive some similarities and deviances, since number of cohorts after World War II have encountered similar settings as in Baltics and in Russia, for instance, in terms of socialization, ideology, as well. They both experienced the terror and, of course, this mirage of classless society. In Russia, generational sequence at large follows the alteration of party leaders and modification of the Soviet dictatorship, which brought several changes in living conditions and biographical opportunities, uh, trajectories, hence fascinated different generations. We would ask how lasting this effect was on generations in other Soviet republics. Do they follow the pattern and reproduce initial this initial formation of generations? Now, now look at a model offered by Baltic researchers. In Lithuania, there have been identified 6 basic cohorts or even generations. Uh, yes, here I would we should ask Laima herself, as she is expected to be among participants. Yes, there is one of classification. Uh, Different generations, quite similar or not very similar with, for instance, Russian, and the next is Estonian one. And Estonian memory scholars operate with historical turning points, as remembered by 5 generations. Um, okay, I'm jumping rather quickly, but if you would like, we may return to these slides. There are slightly, you see, slightly different accents and different lengths of the generation. To further uh, compare these and other generational models with Latvian society, in our studies we propose likewise to spot out 6 generations in Latvia during the 20th century. And you can see this classification is based on life stories from biographical interviews we have collected for the National Oral History Archive in Riga. Okay, comparisons are fruitful if you find parallels not merely in models made by scholars, which might be quite informative, but still is a kind of abstraction. Better if you could find those generations that is that could be meaningful in national or even international remembrance culture. There is, of course, maybe there is a little space to discuss. My time's running out. But for collective memory, there are so-called strategical generations. These are also known as canonical generations, a generational unit that identifies itself and is identified by society with a national canon, which draws on what is understood to be foundational or key event in the history of the nation. Uh, the biographical memories of canonical generation merge with a key national event and serve as a role model for future generations. Uh, Benzel wrote that they are more visible and vocal. These in Baltic States definitely are pre-war these republic generations whose memory survived Soviet pressures and have been translated to facilitate regaining of the independence in our countries, and still is in the core of national historical master narrative. Look, yesterday in Latvia we celebrate the National Heroes Day. Uh, but among different generational voices, still there are many disputed memories and unrecognized stories. Say the pivotal events from 40s and 50s have received more attention, at least within the Baltic context, than the period of late socialism. Mm, Experiences of those born in the 40s remained in the background in public discourse, uh, writes Estonian researcher, and for that reason we can describe some generations as silent one. A silent one. Here it is, yeah, on this slide. Um, Nevertheless, experiences for private life also has an impact on the formation of generational consequences. Author Josalu add in this article. I cite. And lastly, my last slide would be about that. What while new millennium generations has stepping in its active stage, forming its active encounter with other generations, our studies could admit that studies might take up narratives of the generation which in its formative phase, which were in its formative phase in this fresh contact, as Mannheim would say, who faced this dismantle of Soviet Empire. Mm. There is a substantive study to understand this generation by Russian-born Alexei Yurchak, professor of anthropology. He is the author of the book about this last Soviet generation who grow up in so-called performative shift. where ideological practices formally were reproduced, but their meaning constantly shifted, and for whom the collapse of empire was something special, part of their youth, which is crucial for a generation to breed, to form. Um, yes, what, to conclude, to say last words, for me, it would be terribly interesting to discuss about generations who are most manifest or contrary silenced, to know which stories occupy a prominent place in our national narratives, how to trace biographical these recollections, and then as said, the importance of the narratives in public sphere, and particularly for remembrance culture, what kind of memories are foundational for history writing, and how it could develop in Poland, in Romania, in Scandinavia, and also in Baltic states. So here I could stop, and we could we could proceed with maybe some questions or discussions, because of course there are many themes to talk about. For instance, you know that um, the demographic composition of Latvia is that Latvians compose just more than half of population. So there is a challenging question about uh, patterns of generational patterns among uh, these representatives of non-Latvian speaking part of our country. I believe there is a quite maybe differences, and we also have a studies on Roma people, and again there could be another there there are another memories we know, but how it structures the generations in their communities. Okay, thank you for your attention, colleagues. Uh,
Thank you, Edmunds. Thank
yes,
you very much for the wide insight into,
how to stop to share.
yeah. Thank you very much for your insight into the generation problematic. In analysis of memories, we often have this problem, and we often have had also discussions regarding how to make the systematization of generations and how to choose the exact criteria to make these borders between generations. And especially I was very fond about your about the last aspect in your presentation. How are the borders of generations in other ethnic groups? It would be interesting to maybe to hear. Yes, it's a very big, interesting topic.
Yeah, it will be starting point for next studies. Yes,
Yes. Maybe it could be really a starting point for next studies. And I think it would be now very interesting if colleagues have some questions or discussions or comments on the presentation of Edmunds. It would be interesting to hear your opinion, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And I have some questions. Do you have some experience to compare youngest generation in different region, and when we may compare the pole of forgetting, because I think that every generation has their own pole of forgetting. Do you have some experience to compare the pole of forgetting between different generation, or maybe between youngest generation in different regions, in different, maybe in different countries?
Uh, excuse me, I didn't hear the first part of the question because there was a problem with microphones. But did you ask it about at first about younger generations, this last Soviet millennial generations, and how to
Youngest generation. Do you have this experience to compare which to compare between different region? Because I think every generation has their own pole of forgetting. Yeah.
Oh.
For example, maybe we may compare different generation to use this concept, pole of forgetting, by Ali Dasman. You know it.
Okay, for forgetting.
Or
I didn't hear.
oblivion zone in memory.
Mm-hmm.
I think every generation has some oblivion zone, and it means we may compare this kind of oblivion zone in different region.
Region, you mean countries, different countries?
No, for example, Baltic countries.
Oh, yes. Yes, no, at first we have to collect these stories, these biographical narratives from younger generations. They are still, we are disputing whether, for instance, younger generations, younger people, whether they have more or less completed life story to be collected. Of course, we can collect meanings, opinions, but of course, we are interested in this broader perspective on his or her own life, which encompasses different periods and of history. So of course we are just could start collect the and but of course the younger generations are starting forming their so say collective memory. They're starting form this discourse about the history, what is important, what they learn from previous generations, and they learn, of course, these mostly maybe these leading narratives and the real memories about life under Soviet regime behind this, besides this terror aspect, of course, which is stable narrative in our countries. But what are these another forms in living in the Soviet regime? But again, this breeds this let's gives way for some imaginative, nostalgic views towards Soviet past among younger generations. They are also maybe a little bit tired of this very dark, dark conception of Soviet legacy, and they're trying to find something something positive also, or something exciting in this. But as Dmitry Bykov once said, that we all are like stalkers who go to this Soviet past to bring some wonderful some materials to work with in present times.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting results. And then I try to ask you maybe in the next conference or maybe seminar, maybe we may organize some seminar between our laboratory. Yeah. Okay.
Always
Okay. Thank you.
happy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone once again. Thank you, Edmunds, for your talk. And I have one question. Okay, so my question is as follows: what is the relation between category of generation and the category of the social class, and general between category of generation and the economic level of society? I'm asking you about it because you have spoke about the social shaping of the generation. So maybe, in my opinion, class experience is something different from generation experience. So what is the relation between these two categories?
Yeah, I told you ethnic division, but also there is a class division too. And Morris Kolbaks also told about the family memory of class, different bourgeois, and the religious memory. Yes, this distinctive, and they could produce different divisions and communities of experience in the society. Yeah, class, I would say it's quite, it's another kind of term, because class reproduced itself, but generation lasts for some limited time in the history. It has its own maybe mission or fate, and then it dissolves, and it's just memory left from this or that generation. Generations, I believe, encompass different classes, because generations formed when they are challenged by some problems in society, difficulties, crises, and they try to find their own answers, and these answers are, I believe, are independent from class position. For instance, when this war generations are forming, when under this wartime, this is a problem for all generations. There is no regard of class position. So I think there is another division line, but of course there might be class, of course, impacts our biographical strategies, trajectories, but generation, there is that aspect that generation could be formed also backwards, yeah, in reverse, by this memory, what we experienced collectively. So of course this is a discussion of how to grasp in one concept this concept of generation, this different groups in society, classes and ethnic identities and so on. But generations left some dominant interpretations of society, which are confronted with next generation problems, who also solve their problems, who was left from previous generations, and they try to look for their own means, how to interact with with their challenges. So we will have to be, of course, very keen, very how to little bit divide this conception of class and generation.
Can I butt in? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Can I return to the question of the earlier speaker? I can't read your name because I can't read Cyrillic. Your name is in
Ludmila.
Ludmila. Okay, Ludmila. I think what you said is extremely important, and it relates back to the historian that is still quoted so much, namely Ernest Renan, who said that a nation is united not just by what it remembers, but by what it forgets. So forgetting is very much tied up with national identity. So I think it's would be a really fruitful path to take, to look at the differences in patterns of forgetting, that for example the Baltic states wish to forget their involvement or acquiescence of the National Socialist regime, the Russian national memory needs to forget the Gulag, Polish national identity. Well, so many things that each nation needs to forget. So yes, I think it was such an important, fruitful point, and that merits a study in its own right. But also something that I'll be speaking about later is that we tend to think of forgetting as remembering as good and forgetting as bad, that it's always bad to forget. But sometimes we need to forget in order to get on with our lives, not to be cluttered with the dust, if you like, of past generations. So yeah, thank you so much for that intervention. And I'm so glad you can hear me, because I just had a sign up on the screen saying that I was mute. Thank you, Ludmila.
Thank you, Vida. Yeah, the question lasts can we forget by order?
Can we forget?
By order.
No, of course
by
not.
Command.
Well, we can in an authoritarian society, but that's where all the kind of really interesting issues come up about the relative power of private versus social memory. Yeah, and in our countries, the power and the role of private memory has been hugely undervalued, underestimated.
So thank you for your questions, and thank you, Edmund, for your answers. And maybe
just
we can.
One other point. when Edmunds was talking, there was a great deal of background noise. And for the older generation in particular, it makes it quite hard to hear what's being said.
Really?
Maybe weak connections.
I also noticed that problem because Vidmantas reported that, and then I tried to mute everyone who was not speaking. Like
I see.
Edmunds remains the only person unmuted, so it might be dependent on Edmunds' mic or whatever. I can't say.
Okay.
Can we move to the next speakers? So